All right, with the zip bind stitch in the ditch system, you've got 3 tools that I consider every day, all the time tools. The soulmate, the stitch in the ditch foot, and your zip guns. All right, so let's put the tools away and look at the zip guns. Your zip guns we're going to use in place of straight bins, quilting clips, staples, paper clips, potato chip clips. I showed you a little bit about those earlier. Large, medium, and a small. So you decide where you want to use which size based on the mouth, the depth of the mouth, the height of the mouth, how deep this is. Again, when we look at how small this is versus how large this is, this one's going to grab a whole lot of fabric. I'm going to open this up, fold this, and do you see how that fabric goes in the mouth? This one, even the medium size, there's no way I can get that to catch. This one is going to grab. So if you have a lot of fabric, then of course this makes sense. With a little bit of fabric and how shallow this clip is, if I had a little bit of fabric, you would imagine that this clip is going to go much shallower. So we're going to use these zip clips in place of a bunch of other things you've already used. Those straight pins, quilting clips, staples, paper clips, etc. The soulmate. The soulmate is a 101 uses tool. We call it our 101 uses tool, and you can see how beat up mine is. This tool here has really a bunch of different things you're going to do. This edge right here I use a lot. This edge I use a lot. This edge I use a lot. Those grippers I use a lot. This right here in the middle, it's not sharp enough to do anything. If you want to sharpen this up and you have a Dremel, you get right in there and Dremel that out nice and sharp so it can be what it was supposed to be, a thread cutter. Back in the day when we had the material that was a little bit weaker, this is a stronger material, this was sharp enough. You can take a Dremel and again sharpen that up and you can use that as a thread cutter. This part right here, when we use this, pick out those stitches, you've done an embroidery, your embroidery messes up and you're picking. What you'll see is that even though I'm left-handed, I use scissors with my right hand. I'll pick, grab with tweezers or with my scissors over here and snip those threads. So pick, so I can use that part. I want to show you this part that I use when I go to rip out my stitches. If you've ever been to a trade show and you've seen me stitching in the ditch, you'll see me stitch in the ditch and then I go to rip this out. When I rip this out, I'm going to place my tip right inside of here. Me being left-handed, I'm going to be going this way rather than away from me. The reason why my fabric is at an angle rather than straight is that I want to have range of motion and I don't want to rip my fabric. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and rip this way, and you'll see as I rip, I'm ripping the threads and not the fabric. Now I always like to stop right here, 1, so that I don't rip this, but 2, so I can turn it around and show you right-handers what you would be doing. Because us lefties, we're going this way. Right-handers, I'm going to flip the material. I'm going to get rid of my clip. I'm going to pop this mitered corner up. My pointer finger is going to go underneath, and my thumb is going to be on top. I want to rip this way. Again, not this way. When I place this underneath, this time I'm holding the tool in the opposite direction. This tip is going to go right here. I want you to imagine this is here, rather than here. I don't know if you can tell. I'll turn it this way. I don't want it here. If I do, I'm going to be ripping the fabric right inside of here. I want it about here. This part also I want down flat. I don't want up. My pointer finger is going to be close to here rather than back here, because as I push, I'm going to be pulling. I'm going to push with this finger. I'm going to pull down this way, pulling this straight. When I go to rip, I need range of motion. If I'm standing this way, I'm going to be ripping towards me. And as I rip, you can't tell, but my shoulder is all bunched up. If I rip this way, then I've got range of motion. So I'm going to turn my body this way, and I'm pulling here. And as I go to rip this way is the way you'll do. Now, I'm not very good at the right-handed, so imagine you're going to go this way. You'll be pulling here and ripping here. But here's the thing about this tool. We're going to learn to stitch in the ditch well. So what I just did, you don't need to know how to do. I always have people that want to know, how did you rip that out? You mean you want to get good at the ripping? No, I want you to get good at the sewing. You shouldn't need to do the ripping part. But let's talk about some of the other times you will need to rip something. This tool, love it as a seam ripper, but it's not the best seam ripper out there for all uses. So let's talk about some times you will use the seam ripper. I've got cotton here, 2 layers, and I've got my cotton and a low loft batting and cotton. If I wanted to rip from here to here out for whatever reason, the tool's perfect for that. I'm going to separate the 2 pieces of fabric, put my finger inside, because when I go in between, I want to feel in between. I can feel that stabbing my finger. If I'm feeling it not stabbing my finger, but in between the fabric or in the fabric, I can tell I'm in the wrong spot. What I want to do is feel that tip coming through, and then I would again rip towards me. I have more control ripping towards me than I do away from me. If this wasn't cotton with a low loft batting, a quilted piece here, if I just had 2 pieces of fabric like this and I wanted to rip this out, what I would do is on the top stitch, or the top side, I would pick and pick and pick and pick. I wouldn't rip like I was just showing here, ripping this way. This fabric is too, I don't want to say dainty, but it's too flimsy for me to rip this way. Instead, I'd pick and pick and pick. There are grippers here. Those grippers, if I were to take the top thread, I'd get the bobbin thread and I'd wrap that around here, put my thumb on top and pull. And then I take the thread that I've just pulled and wrap that around and pull. Gathering stitches. If you want to do gathering stitches, imagine you're going to make some of those flowers that we all love wearing, and you did a running stitch, and you take that bobbin thread and wrap that around those grippers, put your thumb on here, pull. The thread that you've just pulled, you're going to wrap around and pull. It's a great tool for that. So gathering stitches. If you're doing all kinds of other things that are real dainty, delicate, different materials, this is, again, not the tool to use. There are great seam rippers out there. This seam ripper I love for when you're dealing with fabrics that are a little bit more sturdy. So what else are we going to do with this tool? All right, are you ready for the 101 uses? Seam ripper, stiletto, embellisher, applique, paper piecing, crazy quilting, finger pressing, machine ribbon embroidery. I can keep going. I know you're going crazy. The idea is you have 101 uses that you'll come up with. My 101 uses will be different than yours. But I want to go through a couple of those that I just talked about. Seam ripper we talked a little bit about. Stiletto. You know how you use those stilettos at your sewing machine. You've got a bunch of fabric that's bulky and you need to get it past. So right inside of here, I don't know if you can see that, right here where that crease is, imagine my needle was here, I would push this through. This flat edge is wonderful for pushing through. If I've got something I just need to hold in place, I can hold it this way, I can hold it this way, I can hold it this way, and you may be on the right side over here with your fabric over there. Push, prod, shove, pull, manipulate, flip, turn, force, crease, etc. So we're going to use the tool like this, like this. So seam ripper, stiletto, embellisher. You're doing something that you're embellishing. If you've got some of those great yarns, some of those great eyelash furs, the eyelash yarns, those kinds of things, as you're stitching, maybe you're doing some kind of a design here, plop this down, plop this down, plop this down in front of your sewing machine needle. So embellishing. If you're doing any ribbon embroidery, these great flowers that you can make with this, you've got your thin ribbon embroidery. Drop your feed dog so that you've got free range there. Put a stitch in that ribbon and just take a locking stitch or holding it down here, stitch, stitch, stitch in place. Take this tool, build yourself a petal, stitch, stitch, stitch. We're going to turn the fabric, build yourself a petal, stitch, stitch, stitch. Build yourself a petal, stitch, stitch, stitch. Every time I turn the fabric, I can turn the fabric consistently. I can't do this and do this and do this and do this consistently. I don't have that skill, and most people I know don't either. So as you're building those petals, turn your fabric, turn your fabric, turn your fabric. Embellishing. You can do a ton of things. You're going to use your own imagination for that. So seam ripper, stiletto, embellisher, applique. Applique, when you put a piece of applique down, if you've used freezer paper and you've ironed that and that fabric starts to fold a little bit, not in the right place, give it a good crease with this tool. Hold it in place as you're stitching that down. So you can use this for applique. Seam ripper, stiletto, embellisher, applique, paper piecing. Paper piecing, we've got paper on the back. What are we going to do? Rip that out with this tool. What are we going to do? Give those good creases. When you do paper piecing, you need to make sure that those folds are really right in place. So we use this tool. Hold it down flat. So I always go back in order because I can't remember them without in order. Seam ripper, stiletto, embellisher, applique, paper piecing, crazy quilting, crazy quilting. You've got blue jean fabric, silk dupioni, a stretch velour. Plop this down on top, plop this down on top, plop this down on top when you go to your ironing board. All those fabrics are all different textures, they're different weights, they all bunch up, they're inconsistent. So with my blue jean fabric, I'm going to plop this down, I put the iron on top, and then I remove the tool. This lets me give a good press and it holds that down. I place this over here. You'll notice I have a pucker built in here. Imagine I'm putting this down, put the iron on top of there. What's it doing? It's saving my fingers from the iron. So I don't want to worry about my fingers being there, but this tool holds that down flat. Another thing you can do with the ironing board when you've done your pressing, instead of pressing with an iron by itself, I want you to think about pressing with this tool. Do you see what that tool does to that seam? It does a beautiful job of pressing open those seams. So if I go to my iron and my iron is shut off, I use this tool instead. If I'm doing a 9 patch where I've got this amount, and then I've joined my seams. You know how your seams need to go ironed in different directions. Plop this on one direction, on the opposite direction, plop that on the other, put the iron down on top, and again, pull that out. What does this tool do? It's holding the fabric down so I can catch it with the iron. It's not doing the pressing. I don't press with this down there. It's holding that fabric so I can put my iron on top and then remove that. So we're going to use it there as well. All right, seam ripper, stiletto embellisher, applique, paper piecing, crazy quilting, finger pressing. Just showed you finger pressing there for pressing those seams open. Seam ripper, stiletto embellisher, applique, paper piecing, crazy quilting, finger pressing, machine ribbon embroidery. Talked a little bit about that, but I want to talk about embroidery too. If you have an embroidery machine, imagine this is a hoop and this is a hoop and this is your side of your hoop, and your fabric starts to come out. If you haven't stabilized well, if you haven't hooped well, then your fabric here, it's starting to bunch up a little bit. It's getting loose, so you press and you press and you press. I'm going to turn this a little bit so we can hopefully see better. Press and press and press. What am I doing? I'm pushing that fabric back in the hoop, getting it in there nice and tight. So we'll press and press and press. So it's giving a little bit of snugness to that hoop. When you are doing applique in the hoop, typically what happens is you'll see where your needle is going to be going. It's going to be going from here down to here. If I've got applique and I haven't used enough basting spray, then plop this down, plop this down, plop this down, plop this down. As my needle moves around, I move this tool around, and that holds. Also, if I haven't stabilized well, this, pressing that down, that helps keep those pieces of fabric nice and smooth. I could go on and on and on about this tool, but you get the idea. I want you to come up with your own 101 uses. There's just a ton of things you can do with this. What I'd love you to do if you don't have little kids around is keep it out of sight, out of mind. If you have little kids around, put it away, but remind yourself when you come into a situation, hey, what will this tool do for me? Tons of things you can do with this tool, so have fun with it. All right, we're going to talk about our stitch in the ditch foot. Our stitch in the ditch foot is our third everyday all the time tool. You can see I've got the number 2 on here. You'll use the foot as a seam guide. You're seeing me doing stitching in the ditch. We've talked about hand binding as well, but I want you to think about before that. If you put a number 1 on here, it's a perfect 1/4 inch piecing foot. So if you're a quilter and a quilter only, you live and breathe by a 1/4 inch. So we've got a perfect 1/4 inch. If you want a scant 1/4 inch, move your needle to the right. The needle sitting center is a true 1/4 inch. From where the needle is here, you can see my foot is stained red. I had some fabric, binding fabric, that has dyed this. I could take some Windex and get that cleaned up. I just don't have any here. But from where my needle would be, that needle would be sitting right along this edge. From here to here is a true 1/4 inch. So when we look at that foot, I've got a perfect 1/4 inch piecing foot. You'll see me doing 1/4 inch piecing in one of the videos. So use it as a 1/4 inch piecing foot. Anything where it's mostly straight, not curves, Drunkard's Path, Grandmother's Fan, double wedding ring. We have a foot called the Curve Master for that, of course. So use this when you've got mostly straight. And we're talking about edges, where you have an edge straight. This is not a foot that stitches along here. I could kind of do it, but not do it well. So we don't use the foot here, we use it along here. So imagine that I had cotton and cotton or flannel and flannel that I was piecing, I'd use this foot. So the number 1. So we're going to use it as a seam guide. We're going to use it for a couple other things. I want you to think, instead of quilting, clothing. It's a top stitching foot. I'm going to pull my blouse up here, and I want you to see this foot on my blouse. I don't know if you can see that. Right here, that ledge where my needle would be over here, double needle, single needle, totally up to you, but do you see how that's going to keep me sewing straight? Does a beautiful job of double needle top stitching. You'll see me doing that later on. So the foot can be all the way open or it can be all the way closed. Again, when you have a straight edge, this foot does a beautiful job of top stitching. Same thing with hemming. I've got a lot of clothing that's too big, so I can take it in and make it fit the way that I want, and that means shortening things too as well. So you can fold your fabric over, fold it over again, grab a zip gun, clip, 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 and then use this foot as your seam guide. This right here, when I'm doing my hemming, this foot does a beautiful job of hemming. My sister, sorry Laura, she's really short, and she always asks me to hem her pants for her. So I'm cutting off a whole lot of fabric, and I use this foot. Sometimes the thread matches, sometimes it doesn't, because I might be doing 8 pairs at a time. But this foot does a beautiful job. If you buy clothing too big, like I was talking about, it does a wonderful job of side seams. So if you want to make your own clothing, skirts, little girls' dresses, backpacks, this foot is perfect for that. Again, when it's mostly straight. If you've got curves, use our foot called the Curve Master. So we've got a ton of stuff to do with this foot. Leave it out, leave the zip guns out, leave that soulmate out, because those are what I call everyday, all the time tools.